All right, so welcome back. This is going to be our second of three parts on kind of the conquest, the settlement of the West. Again, I'm going to try to make this one a little bit shorter, but you know how that works. So, let's see what we got. Today we're going to talk about a little bit about cowboys and kind of aspects of the frontier, as well as kind of like farming in the West and stuff like that. I know it sounds exciting. All right, so let's get. So yesterday, or last time, we talked a lot about, what's bringing people out west: cattle ranching, mining, the Transcontinental Railroad, actually. Uh, but primarily, one of the things we focused on was cattle ranching, and this has to do with kind of the vision um, of the cowboy. And so that's something we're going to talk about a little bit here today. Uh, and kind of where this myth of the cowboy comes from. And a lot of it, of course, comes from movies. You know, there's John Wayne, kind of like the mythological cowboy movie. He's not mythological, I guess, but the most notable, cowboy movie hero guy. Um, the West is an interesting place. Uh, you know, ever since Americans started to come over from Europe and settle, they were always interested in traveling further west. Remember, they had to make that proclamation of 1763 line that said, hey, you can't go any further west than this. And yet, with every new land acquisition, there's eager settlers, there's eager Americans that are willing to kind of push those boundaries west further. Because the West always becomes something new. The West used to be Ohio. The West used to be Illinois. The West used to be, um, you know, Iowa or Nebraska, but now the West is further out. It's places like obviously California or Oregon or Arizona or places like that. So um, by the end of the 19th century, we're really representing the true West, and it represents to a lot of people in America kind of like that last frontier, that last area that we haven't examined yet and charted. And it was this very kind of like exciting and magical, enchanted area. Like New Mexico. What's New Mexico's state motto? The land of enchantment, right? That all fits into this image and model of the American West. Um, and it's also a different landscape. You've got the Rocky Mountains, you've got other like national park ranges, the Cascades, the Sierra Nevadas, places like that. The Grand Canyon, of course, is out there. These are beautiful places and beautiful imagery that people hadn't seen yet, and things that don't exist in the eastern part of the country. So the West represents kind of all these beautiful things that really, as big as our nation is, there's climate and geography and things like that people just have not seen. And that's what's so attractive about the landscape. So this is really typified in the School of Painters, the Rocky Mountain School, which is very much the same as the Hudson River School that we talked about a few chapters ago in chapter 12. These people are trying to capture the natural beauty of the land around them, just like the people did. Now, they're not afraid necessarily, like the people from the Hudson River School, that it was going to disappear at some point, but they want to capture images of the beauty of the West so they can take these paintings and then take them back east, and then people can see, see the beauty that awaits them if they ever go travel west, right? And of course, the other aspect of the romantic vision of the West comes from the cowboy. Now, I told you yesterday about cowboys, how it's really a crappy job. It's not as exciting as, John Wayne or Clint Eastwood movies make it seem. But again, because of stories being written, there was lots of like fictional stories and things that told stories of these heroic cowboys who fought against bad guys and bandits and things like that, and um, you know, becomes this kind of mythological figure of the American West. I like to refer to the cowboys like America's first real superhero. To stand up against evil, often by himself against a group of outlaws. The cowboy becomes kind of this magical figure to America that really still uh, manages to be that same thing today. We have cowboys today too, just in a different sense, right? The myth of the cowboy is someone who, stands up for good despite overwhelming odds against him. It might be one cowboy and six outlaws, and somehow he manages to kill and beat all the outlaws or whatever it might be. Uh, Not different than a lot of the things we see today, whether it's like, you know, a modern day cowboy. It's Christmas time. So you take a movie like Die Hard, the best Christmas movie ever made, right? John McClane's kind of a cowboy in that movie, taking out the terrorists by himself. You look at you know, even like superhero movies, right? Iron Man, Batman, Captain America, right? They have ideals and things that we want to live up to in one way or another, and they're really in many ways like modern day cowboys. So, like I said before, the West represents kind of this last frontier, the last frontier that hasn't kind of been examined yet. And it creates this real romantic vision for a view for what we think it should be, and it's this beautiful place and all that stuff. Uh, One, kind of big part of that is the fact that it's kind of, again, the last place that we have to go that is unique and interesting to us. Um, you know, Nobody's going up to Alaska. Nobody's really going to Hawaii or thinking about that. But you can travel by train to the West and see something that you haven't seen before. If you can imagine the world now, think of a place that is really exciting to you that you'd like to go that you haven't been, that you don't really know what it's like until you go there, right? I mean, I'd love to go to Italy. I haven't been to Italy. So to me, that would be like a frontier. There's other places, of course, too, that I'd like to go. But um, so we have a romantic vision of these things because it's something we haven't seen yet. And that's how people look at the frontier here, because it's kind of that last part of the continental United States that a lot of people haven't really had a chance to explore and imagine. Well, they've had a chance to imagine it, but they haven't had the chance to kind of go out and see what it has to offer. Um, and this kind of speaks into this next thing I'm going to talk about, Frederick Jackson Turner's Frontier Thesis. Okay, and this is something we're also going to refer to as dun, 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 super important AP point number 17. I told you there were a couple of them in here. Super important AP point number 17. Frederick Jackson Turner's Frontier Thesis. Now, Frederick Jackson Turner was a writer who, in around 1890 or so, comes up with this writing about kind of achieving and visiting the last frontier and the dangers that come with that. Um, what Turner is expressing in his frontier thesis, which was something he wrote, was like an essay about the frontier. Turner is kind of expressing or stressing the importance of the frontier, basically as this extension of democracy. Okay. Now Turner asserts here that as long as there is new frontier to expand into for America, democracy is going to continue to spread, is going to continue to spread to new places and rule our government. But once there is no frontier to extend further into, democracy will come to an end. I call it democracy, which is weird, but democracy will come to an end. So that is what the frontier thesis is all about. It's basically saying that as long as there is new lands to extend into, new frontiers to visit, we can extend democracy to those places. But once democracy has reached its limit, meaning there's no new places to expand it into, democracy is going to kind of crash into itself. Um, this becomes cause and effect here. This becomes a prevailing vision of the United States for the 20th century as we go into policies internationally, trying to bring democracy to other parts of the world while we're battling with the Soviet Union, as they try to extend communism to other parts of the world. So, that's kind of a big thing. And the frontier thesis, again, is a really important point that it's important you read about and understand, because I've seen it many times on AP tests. Okay. So we kind of talked about that a little bit already, just the end of the frontier and transcendentalism. In fact, don't even worry about that. All right. Again, here's an image from the Rocky Mountain School, the Colorado River and the Rocky Mountains in the background. Very similar to the images from the, with lots of color and just capturing the beauty of nature. Not too dissimilar from images like this that we looked at a few chapters ago from the Hudson River School. Just trying to capture nature in its most beautiful point. So, all right. So moving on. Let's talk a little bit about farming. You'll notice in the background that is very dry soil that can't be used anymore for growing crops because of drought. So it's a wonderful image. All right. So farming the plains kind of goes from a boom to bust proposition. Okay. Remember, the Homestead Act tries to encourage people to move west, get their 160 acres, and start a farm. Okay, so that's a big deal early on. Start a farm, move out west, start a farm, and make a good life for yourself. And a lot of people do that. But again, with anything else, just like cattle ranching, just like mining, if too many people kind of get into that, eventually it's going to bust, especially in an industry like farming, because it's so dependent on the weather. A couple bad seasons, you're out of business. Okay, so early on, the boom, and this is from roughly, we'll say, about 1865, roughly, to about 1885. So during this time, you have very inexpensive rail rates. So very inexpensive rail rates, which is good. Rail rates are going to be kind of a big deal here. We'll talk about them in a couple chapters and later on in today's lesson. So you're getting plenty of rainfall on the plains. You're having cheap rail rates, which is important because when you're talking cheap rail rates, it means that farmers can take their wares, can take their crops, their grain, whatever, to the railroads. And they can be transported east where they're going to be eaten and sold at a cheap rate. And that's really, really good for them. In fact, the United States at one point is referred to as the breadbasket of the world. At the height of kind of at the height of the rise here of the Great Plains farmer, the United States is producing 85% of the world's wheat. Okay, it's producing 85% of the world's wheat. So things are going really, really good. And when things are going great, that's great. Farmers are making money, independent farmers, everybody's doing generally pretty well. Okay, as long as the rain keeps coming, as long as rail rates remain cheap, everybody's good. So how does the bust happen? As you guessed, water becomes scarce, rain becomes scarce, and railroads start jacking up their costs. Okay? In the winters of 1886 and 1887, you had the worst recorded 2 years in a row, two of the worst winters in the history of the United States, at least on the plains. This destroys the fortunes of many farmers as they lose much of their season's crop. Even some of your more durable crops like wheat and corn and like beans, some beans like soybeans, I think, hay, they even take a hit. Well, the cause and effect of that is then the railroads say, why do I need to come up and pick up the little crop you have to offer for such a low rail rate when I can go to other places, pick up more from industrial farmers, commercial farmers, and make more money. Okay, in other words, squeeze these little farmers kind of out of the game a little bit, which of course is really, really bad for them. Okay, so what happens as a result of this? We have a phenomenon called reverse migration. Okay, when these winters go really, really bad, you have a couple options. Number one, you can try to wait it out and see what happens, or you can take what little money you might have, what little things you might have, and try to move back to the city and seek jobs in the city, making these places even more rural, making it harder, even harder to find help and work. So it leaves farmers with a really difficult decision, a really difficult position to be in. Do we stick it out or do we go back? Many choose to go back to the cities or to go to the cities and try to find, plentiful work there. They're not going to make as much, they're not going to do as well, but at least you could probably find steady work in a factory. The ones that stay behind risk losing everything. The drier it gets, the more likely you are to get windstorms and things like that, which could kill off your livestock or even kill people. So the ones that stay and try to fight this time out really, really doesn't work out too well for them on the average. And that again creates a difficult circumstance that farmers are really going to have a tough time coming back from. All right. So a little bit more on the farmers here. Um, so during this time, industrious people start to see the possibility or growth into commercial agriculture. Basically, what commercial agriculture is like not small independent farms, but like big time farms that are owned by, major businesses or something like that. Commercial agriculture is mass agriculture for significant profit. I produce a lot of something and I send it out. An example would be, these companies that make, vegetables like Green Giant and things like that. That's commercial agriculture. They produce a lot of vegetables and fruits or whatever, and they put them out to be sold in mass. Okay, what is the advantage of commercial agriculture? It's readily available at all times. It's not as dependent on weather, just because there's so much of it, and you have relatively inexpensive rail rates, or more manageable rail rates, because the railroads, it's more financially beneficial for the railroads to come to them than it is, to go to just the small middle of the road farmer. So, in order to keep up with these folks, regular farmers turn to overproduction, right? The problem with the farmer, and we're going to visit this quite a bit in the build up to the Great Depression. The problem with the farmer is old MacDonald. The farmer is quite uneducated, and they figure their solution to not making any money is by producing more. When you produce more, the value of what you have continues to go down. Overproduction drives down the value of the crops you have, and you ultimately don't make any more money. Big problem. So we see the same thing happen with wheat. What does this do to the price of wheat? Obviously, it dramatically drops it. Wheat becomes worth much less, meaning farmers start making significantly less. What builds up over time here is a level of frustration amongst farmers because they feel they're being misrepresented by Eastern business interests. Okay, so the farmers come up with basically a group of grievances that they have kind of with the government and Eastern industrialists. Okay, and there's three principal grievances that the farmers have. Okay, generally against railroads. Now, grievance number one is that they felt that there was a conspiracy as the railroads controlled the need and basically they felt there's a conspiracy because the railroads control too much of what gets picked up and what crops go back east, and they charge what we call predatory rail rates to kind of, in their minds, kick the independent farmer out of business. So, number one, again, they felt that there was a conspiracy because the railroads controlled kind of too much power and charged these predatory rail rates that were bad for independent farmers. Number two, um, was the banks. Their second grievance is against banks. That they felt that the bank was too far away for independent farmers to get to, so it was very difficult for farmers to get credit. Okay, so banks are far away and not accessible for farmers living in rural areas, and therefore they can't achieve or get credit. Okay, um, grievance number three is farmers basically felt that they were controlled um, by Eastern capitalists. Eastern capitalists who start these big mega farms, these big commercial farms, uh, and they felt that these folks were kind of conspiring against them. So the farmers are frustrated. They feel that they're not being represented. They're angry with Eastern businessmen. They're angry with the railroads. They're angry with the banks. And they feel they need to get some sort of representation. So again, number one, they felt there was a conspiracy from the railroads because they control too much um, influence and they charge these predatory rail rates against them. Number two, that the banks were too far away and so it was difficult to get credit. And again, number three, they felt Eastern capitalists were conspiring against them to drive them out of the farming industry in favor of commercial farming. Okay. Um, okay, so we talked about that. I think that's it. So yeah, it still again went a little bit longer than I thought, but you know, we're doing the best we can. I think that's it. So if there's anything else, we'll just pass by because I covered everything I wanted to. But certainly, if you have any questions, shoot me an email, and we will continue tomorrow. All right, see you.